Welcome back to the Crysalli service and installation videos. In today's video we are going to go through the process of rebuilding a Crysalli faucet. We'll also go through some of the scenarios of the failure modes and how we're going to address those. What we're going to do is we're going to go through a series of different leak points and on the faucet, and we'll start with the back of the shank and then we'll work our way all the way to the front. So as you can see here, we've got this replicating to where we're seeing a drop of water coming down through the back side of this spacer, the shank spacer, and it's leaking through. So this could be a loose faucet. In this case, that's what it is. Or it could be the seal that between the back side of the shank and the tower could be scarred, or it could be pinched. But as you can see, this faucet is loose. So by just rotating this faucet clockwise, we are tightening up the sealing on it, and then we'll rotate the faucet and correct that issue. So the leak we're addressing is, in this particular scenario, is the shank has come loose, and this is the seal that creates the seal between the faucet shank and the tower. So if it comes loose, we're losing compression on that seal, therefore it's leaking and it's bypassing and coming around the threads. It could also leak down into the tower and be leaking below. That's another place that the leak may show up. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to loosen this set screw that is on the shank spacer. It's actually a 5mm Allen wrench to loosen that. So next I'm going to rotate this faucet clockwise. As you can see, this was very loose until it's snug, and then what we're going to do is we're going to dry up this area where we were seeing some leaks all around there, and then the system's still pressurized, and I'm going to check for leaks and verify that there's no leaks. Next thing what we'll do is we'll shut the water off, then we'll remove the faucet and orientate it in the right orientation. So we've shut the water off. As you can see, nope, it's not pressurized. Next thing what we're going to do is we're going to use our faucet wrench, and we're going to loosen this collet. We'll loosen it, and then we'll rotate it. As you can see, there's these little grooves on the shank. Those will bite into the mating teeth that are on the inside the faucet. Once I insert them, I want to make sure it's nice and straight. It's straight, and then I'm going to hand tighten this till it's snug. Then I'll take the faucet wrench, and then we're going to go counterclockwise on this. And at the same time, you want to hold the faucet and tighten that as tight as you can. If the shank moves, just get it back into orientation so it's nice and snug. Last step, we're going to take our Allen wrench. I like to put the set screw on the bottom, and then just tighten that set screw snugly. You don't have to go too tight, just to make it snug. So probably the most common leak point is this collet nut where it attaches to the faucet. Over time it becomes loose, and you can see there's a little drip point, so it's leaking. This is part of the preventative maintenance program, is to tighten this collet nut. So this one is obviously it's loose. So the system comes with the faucet wrench, and you really on a weekly basis you need to check this to make sure that this is tight and secure it tightly. So once you hand tighten it all the way down, you get your faucet wrench in there, and you just really put some pressure on it, make sure it's good and tight and it won't shake, and that should resolve your leaking faucet if it's leaking from this between the shank and the faucet itself. So another place where the faucet might leak from is underneath this black cover plate. So if you see a leak from there, it's probably leaking from the O-ring on the top of the pivot ball. So what we'll do is I'll show you where that would be. remove the handle, remove the jam nut, and then we'll pull this off. So as you can see, there's some water coming up. So underneath this locking nut, there's an O-ring that seals on the pivot ball, and this could either be loose, and usually that is the case, and the rebuild kit comes with a tool to remove this, which we'll go through here in a moment. So another point that we've seen, it's less common, but if your faucet's leaking from the spout consistently, it's the front facing seal where the pivot ball shuts off the water. That point has probably gotten worn out and needs to be replaced. So assuming we tighten the shank, tighten the collar nut, and by tightening up some of these areas that become loose, if that doesn't fix the leak, then we do sell a rebuild kit, so we can disassemble, take this faucet off of the tower, and then we have a rebuild kit so we can rebuild all these seals. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to shut off the water, and if we're working on the sparkling side, you're going to want to shut off the power and the CO2 as well. So I've gone ahead and shut off the water powered CO2. I'm going to bleed the water pressure off. Once that's completely bled off, we'll go ahead and start the disassemble process. It's always easiest to go ahead and take this handle off of the tower before we go any further. But let's say we need to change the seal in the rear of the tower or on the rear of the shank. We're going to go ahead and just rotate this completely off. And now what I can do is I can use the faucet wrench to remove the faucet from the shank. Now we'll go ahead and rebuild the faucet. So in this clip, what we've done is we've completely disassembled a faucet, and we're going to go through each component and explain its purpose. And so we'll start with the shank, or we'll start with the rear sealing gasket, and we'll work our way all the way to the front to the point of dispense. So this little white device, this is the rear sealing gasket. This is what actually creates the seal from the shank to the tower. It actually goes into the back side of the shank. This is your spacer, which creates the space between, it covers the threads. This is your collet, which locks the faucet. It just locks the shank to the faucet. This is your compensator. The compensator, goes in and out of the shank, which adjusts your flow. This seal right here, it actually goes on behind the teeth of the shank and creates a seal there. Then you have this O-ring, which is on the opposite side. It's on the mating side, and it goes inside the faucet and also helps to create a double seal. Then I'll start down here. This is 2 O-rings that go on your cam. So this cam actually rotates and it engages into the compensator there, and as you rotate it, it adjusts in and out. So it comes with 2 O-rings. I'll just put the one on, you get the point. But there's 2 O-rings that go in the 2 grooves there. Then you have another O-ring that goes on the outer side of the cam adjustment. And then you've got, so this cam will go inside, and then you've got a number of different components. So there's a nut that goes on top of that. You have a locking washer, and then you have this the plastic adjustment. So this secures down. This actually allows you to rotate by hand, adjusting the cam. Then on the top side of the faucet, you have a O-ring that creates the seal on the pivot ball. So this prevents the leak from coming on the top. This is a little guide that goes over the pivot ball and keeps it positioned so that you get a nice smooth pull on the handle. And then you have a locking nut that goes down on the top and locks everything into place on the top. Also a tool, a couple tools that it comes with. This is a special tool to help remove or tighten this locking nut, so it engages in, there's 4 teeth on it, it engages into the locking nut. And then I usually use a screwdriver once you get it all assembled and use that to tighten it down. We also supply in, with our install kit, we supply this O-ring grease. It's important, this is NSF approved O-ring grease. So it's not gonna, it doesn't have any toxins that are gonna be harmful. It also comes with a faucet wrench. And then on the front side, there's this other O-ring. This O-ring actually seats in the very front of the faucet on the front side of the pivot ball. So this is what actually creates the on and off. So as that pivot ball rotates back, it allows flow to come forward. When you rotate it, when you push the handle back, it presses the pivot ball against this O-ring, shutting off the flow. And then last but not least, you have the nozzle. The nozzle, we send a nozzle with the install kit or with the rebuild kit as well. It comes with 2 O-rings that goes in and out of the body faucet. So now we'll go through the components that come with the rebuild kit and go through the step-by-step process of rebuilding a faucet. Now we're going to go through the process of rebuilding the faucet. You're going to need a small little Phillips screwdriver. This particular one has Phillips and a flathead. Flathead comes in handy as well with removing some of the O-rings. I also have an O-ring pick that will help. And then the rebuild kit. This rebuild kit also comes with a faucet wrench and the tool that I mentioned earlier in the video to help remove the top portion. All right, so start by getting out some of these components. There's a couple bags in here that have some of the miscellaneous components, a lot of which were laid out earlier. A bag with all the O-rings and seals and some O-ring grease. This is the spout, replacement spout, and then the tool that we're going to need to remove the upper portion. So I've unpacked all the components and kind of laid them out. So the first step is we're going to grease all the O-rings. So I'm taking the O-ring grease that comes in the kit. I'm going to peel off the tip here and then apply some O-ring grease to my fingers, and we're going to go ahead and just lightly coat all of these O-rings with O-ring grease. All right, so I'm just going to finish applying this O-ring grease. It's important that you use the O-ring grease that's supplied with the kit, or a NSF approved O-ring grease is very important. And then the last but not least is there's a couple O-rings that are on the spout. I like to put a nice thin layer that'll help so you can press in and remove this spout easily. So now that we've applied a thin layer of O-ring grease on the O-rings, I've kind of laid them out in size so that as you're removing the O-rings from the faucet, we can match them up with the right size O-ring that's going to go back onto the new faucet, and we'll discard the old ones. So the second step is we're going to go ahead and remove the shank from the faucet, and then we'll start by removing and replacing the seal. So I'm going to remove this white seal from the rear of the shank, and I'm going to replace it with a new one here, and just press that in. Take your finger, press it in firmly, and then the other seal on the front side of the faucet is behind these teeth. I'm just going to take the O-ring pick, pull that, match that up with this one over here. So that's the second one, as you can see, same size. I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the cup, take the new one, and install that. Step 3 will be to remove the cam assembly. One thing I failed to mention earlier in the video when we were talking about tools required, we're going to need a small crescent wrench or a 17mm opened end wrench to remove this cam assembly. What I'll do first is I'm going to take a small Phillips screwdriver, and I will remove this Phillips screw. These components, the screw and this component, comes with the install kit. sometimes the back side of this is stripped off because people don't loosen it and try and adjust the flow, and it shears off this inner knob. So I'll set those aside. There's also a lock washer, and that lock washer is to help prevent when we tighten it all down so that this cam doesn't fluctuate with the water hammer. I think we've talked about that in an earlier video. I'll go ahead and set that aside. And now I'm going to, this is where I need the wrench or the small screwdriver, so I'm going to take there's two flats on this, and I'm going to go ahead and take a 17mm wrench here and loosen that. Once it's loose, I can back that nut off. We'll set that down. Now there's a tricky part is getting this cam out. I like to take a screwdriver, a flat head screwdriver, insert it into there. This particular one of these 6-in-1, the screwdriver that comes in there actually fits pretty nicely in there. I like to stick it in and put a little bit of a side load and pull outward, and then it'll loosen this. You don't want to grab this with any with pliers or anything. You don't want to gouge the sides because then you won't be able to rotate it. And this is the cam. And now we'll replace the O-rings on the cam as well as this O-ring here. Now I'm gonna just take a pick and I'm gonna remove this O-ring that's on the main body, but on the cam assembly or the flow control assembly. Discard that one and replace it with the O-ring of its same size. Next, I'm going to replace the cam O-rings. So we're going to go ahead and remove these two O-rings off of the cam. And as you can see, there's these two grooves, so it's a double seal on this. I'm gonna go ahead and grab some replacement O-rings and slide it into the groove, and then slide this one over into the second groove. Might be easier to come on this side. There we go. So now we've installed the two O-rings on the cam. All right, step 4, we're gonna remove the nozzle. Don't throw this away. You might be able to use this in the future. These should be removed on a regular basis and cleaned probably weekly, if not daily. But if for whatever reason you lose it, at least you got a backup. So let's not pitch that, but you should probably tell the staff that they should be cleaning it on a regular basis. Step 5, we're gonna go ahead and remove this compensator. And there is an O-ring right here, the inner seal that seals against the shank. We're going to go ahead and replace that. So just press that in till it should just kind of fall into place. So step 6, we're going to remove the pivot ball assembly. This is this section that opens and closes the valve. So first take the jam nut off, and then we're going to take the cover off. And then what I like to do is I'm going to rotate this into, so it's sitting in the center of the faucet. And then we're going to take that tool that comes with the assembly. You notice there's 4 teeth on the tool. We're going to gauge them onto the 4 slots on that nut. Once I get it engaged, then there's this hole in the top of the tool. I put a screwdriver through the top, and we're just going to rotate that and spin it loose. Once it's loose, by hand, we can finish pulling that nut out. And we'll go ahead and toss that nut because the new one comes with the tool. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pair of pliers, and I'm going to grab the pliers. Notice there's 2 flats on this pivot nut. Don't grab it by the threads. Let's grab it by the flats, and we're going to pull this assembly out. so this little brown plastic knob assembly, we're going to go ahead and throw that away. A lot of times this is broken up, so you're going to want to clean up all the plastic that's in there, because the new assembly comes with one. We'll clean this pivot ball, and now we're going to, there's an O-ring that seals on the bottom of this ball, and we're going to go ahead and replace that. All right, so I'm going to take the pick, get it in here. There's the O-rings in there. And I just kind of pushed that O-ring down into the bottom so I can access it by. So I removed that O-ring. Now I'm going to, we'll match that up with the new one, and I'm going to push this one in. So it's going to be hard to video because my finger's going to be in the way, but I like to put one finger underneath and just kind of push it into, there's a groove in there. So I've got the O-ring in place, and in the next step we're going to go ahead and replace the front sealing, the face seal. So the last thing, there's this O-ring in the front here. I don't know if you could see it, but this is the front face seal that seals on the pivot O-ring. So I'm going to take the O-ring and I'm going to pull that one out. And then this is the last O-ring that we're going to replace. And I'm going to drop the new one in there. And this one, it's really going to be difficult. I just take my finger and I will work it into place. And there you go, it's in place. All right, so now we're going to reassemble the upper pivot ball assembly. So I've gone ahead and I've cleaned this pivot ball. I'm going to go ahead and push that in, and what I like to do is I'll flip this upside down and put some pressure on it. It'll pop into place. So it's popped through that O-ring, and then the next step will be we're going to start reassembling it. Now I'm going to drop this little bronze plastic nut over the top, get that aligned in there. All right, so we're going to push that in all the way. So as you can see, it sits in there. The top of the bronze should be to the top of the flat where the threads stop. And then we're going to insert the locking nut. So I've got the locking nut down to where I'm ready to start tightening it. But before I do so, I wanted to point out, notice that locking nut has some Teflon tape on it. When we assemble these, we use some medium strength Loctite, but on the install kit we can't do that. So we put some Teflon tape. It's just to prevent it from backing out. So now I'm going to take this tool, do like what we did to remove it, get the teeth to engage into that locking nut, and once it's in there, we can start tightening it down. Then I'm going to take and insert the screwdriver in through the hole and just rotate it. You don't need to over tighten this, but you need to tighten it until it stops, and then just make it snug. If you make it too tight, it's going to put too much pressure on that pivot ball and it won't open and close easily. So we got the locking nut into place, and what I like to do at this point is just rotate this pivot ball, make sure it's firm, but it's not overly tight and it's not too loose. And then we'll finish the assembly by putting this little black cover on. The longer portion of the point is going to point down towards the front of the spout, and then I'll put the jam nut on. Now we have completed that assembly of the upper portion of the pivot ball. All right, so step 9 is we're going to install the compensator and the flow control adjustment. So this is the compensator. This has a hole in it, so you're going to want to put this in and align the hole just kind of on the edge there. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to take the cam and we want to put that the ball that's on the bottom of the cam and engage it into the compensator. Push that in. At this point, just to make sure it's moving in and out, I take that the flathead screwdriver from a 6-in-1, put it in there and just kind of rotate it. It should be rotating nice and smoothly. Once we confirm that's the case, we'll go ahead and take the nut this has the smooth with 2 flats. This is the one that uses the 17mm wrench. So I'll hand tighten it. And once I hand tighten it, I'll take the little wrench, and this, you don't need to tighten this that tight at all. Just make sure it's on there firmly. If you go too tight, then it won't, it'll make it difficult for this. It'll put too much pressure on the cam. But again, take this screwdriver and everything's rotating nicely. So now we'll go ahead and install this lock washer. And then I'm going to drop down the black adjustment knob, engage that in there. Then we'll drop the screw into place and we will start to tighten that. No need to tighten it all the way, just get it into place because later on we're gonna need to adjust the flow. So we can leave that loose for now. All right, step 10 has got to be the easiest part of the whole assembly. We're going to take the new nozzle. Remember, we've applied a little bit of O-ring grease to those, and that's just going to slip right into place. Step 11, we're going to go ahead and install the shank, but don't forget to put the spacer ring on first. So slip that on, and then go ahead and hand tighten the shank into place. And then what I do is I take the faucet, I put it in and I use the faucet as my wrench to tighten it into place. So once that shank is in tight, then we can go ahead and start installing the faucet. All right, step 12, we're going to install the faucet. So now that this faucet's tight, I still have to tighten that spacer, but we'll get to that here in a second. So I engage this so it's even on the shank, and then I'm going to hand tighten this collar nut. Then what we'll do is we'll take the faucet wrench, hold on to the faucet, and just make sure you get that snug. And then last, while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and take and tighten up this spacer using an Allen wrench. Just no need to over tighten it, just make it snug so it doesn't rotate. So the last step will be to set the flow. I've gone ahead and installed the tap marker. I've turned on the water, the power, and the CO2. So now we were going to go ahead and make some adjustments to the flow. So I'm opening up the nozzle. And first off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen this flow control so I can adjust it. Once I get the ideal flow rate, I'm going to go ahead and install my screwdriver in and tighten it. One thing, if you're working on the inner faucet, it's a little more difficult to get the screwdriver in there. So this S-shaped screwdriver you can get at the local hardware store makes it real convenient to work on the inside, but does the same thing. Now that that's tightened, can't be adjusted by hand. We've set the flow rate and check for leaks. Everything should be good to go.